Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us here again tonight. For those of you who don't know, my name's Justin. I'm part of the stakeholder engagement team here at AusNet, and I'll be your host for this evening. So welcome. Tonight we hear about the significant volume of work that's been undertaken in the investigation of the existing conditions report surrounding the topic of landscape and visual amenity. We will just hold off for a few seconds, just while a few more join us, so I can see more people logging on. So if we'll just wait for a few more seconds for some people to log on, and we'll be back into it. I think we're almost there at the moment now with people logging on, which is great. So we'll kick off. As I said, my name's Justin. Welcome to everyone this evening for our Landscape and Visual Amenity webinar. Before we kick off, I'd just like to do a welcome to country. And so on behalf of everyone with us today, we acknowledge the various traditional owners of the land on which we all meet this evening. We pay respect to their elders, both past, present and emerging. We also acknowledge those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that are here with us tonight. Tonight, we look at landscape and visual amenity for our webinar. And what we'll cover, obviously, the presentation from our technical specialist, Hayden, who is our lead on landscape and visual amenity. And followed by that will be a question and answer session to finish off. Just some housekeeping before we kick off. There are many participants in the webinar, and therefore attendees will be muted. So it'll just be Hayden and myself that you'll be stuck with this evening. Just so everyone knows, offensive language and personal attacks won't be tolerated. So we ask people to keep your questions relevant to the topic at hand, and as they come through, we'll ask them. But we won't be tolerating any personal attacks or bad language. Unfortunately, not all questions can be answered today. The reason for that is whether it's the volume or the questioning itself. That said, we do ask that your questions you put directly into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and any outstanding questions will be used to update our frequently asked questions on our website. That said, some of the questions that we have got through over the previous webinars haven't been directly related to the topic. So we'll get into that a little bit more in the next slide, but that could be another reason why not all questions are answered. A project timeline. The existing condition reports have been submitted to the technical reference group, hence why we're here this evening with Hayden, who'll give us our update on the landscape and visual amenity report. And we're here today to share the finding of the existing conditions. Hence, at this stage, we're answering questions that relate to the existing conditions. So we cannot answer any questions about the potential impacts. The reason being is that work's still being undertaken. So we will continue to answer all the questions that we can. So please make sure your questions are relevant to the topic and pertinent to the subject on the existing conditions. So for me, I'd like to introduce Hayden, our lead for the visual amenity and landscape space, and hand it over to him for tonight's presentation. Thanks, Hayden.
Thank you, Justin. Just while I share my screen, thank you everyone for making the time to come along tonight. It's a very important step for us as part of the visual impact assessment to be able to share this information and our early findings with the community, but also use these forums and future sessions as a sounding board to make sure that we're picking up on the right locations. There aren't areas that we've missed that are significant to the community, and that they do assist to inform part of the assessment. So thank you for coming down, and hopefully we can make it a mutually beneficial session. So an overview of the slide deck I've put together is just a quick rundown of the ES scoping requirements for landscape and visual impact assessment. And sorry for not looking at the screen. I've got the slide deck over here on the other one in front of me. The ES scoping requirements. So what are we required to assess, and come at some of the key steps? What we're hearing from community consultation, the key learnings to date, the area of interest, so the initial project area that we started with and the study area and how that will move over time. We've got a review of the existing conditions and the landscape character units. So what are we seeing as the features of the area that make up the area that the project moves through? Publicly accessible locations or areas of interest that we are wanting to carry forward as part of the visual impact assessment, but also seek the community's involvement to make sure that we've got the right locations and any other locations can be added to them. Next steps, where to from here? And I thought it'd be worthwhile just to bring forward a bit of a discussion on photo montages, their role and use, and what we're hoping to do with the project and the information. Scoping requirements. So these are the key issues that must be addressed by the visual impact assessment. Firstly is to understand the potential impacts on significant landscape values and landforms in proximity to the project in the area of interest. So that's what are the features, what are the areas, what are the landscapes that we must consider and how must we consider them. Identify, locate and consider potential nearby landowners, residents and communities that might be affected visually by the project or its component infrastructure. And to understand the addition of this project to the landscape and existing features and projects that might already be existing and understand the cumulative impacts of this project in that context from a visual nature. Where are we at with the scoping requirements? We are partway through characterising the landscape character, features and values of the area within the project, the area of interest and the surrounding area. We are identifying public and private, the report calls them viewsheds, but locations in proximity to the project that could be impacted by the project and making sure that we're capturing those and they form part of the full impact assessment of the project. Next steps will be moving forward and understanding and breaking down the key features of the project that might contribute to a change in views and amenity, and we'll come to those shortly. Identifying the viewshed, so how far, how wide, and what are the areas that might have potential visibility of the project and what are the key features and significance of those. And then coming into mitigation measures. How do we avoid, minimise and reduce the impacts of the project should it be approved? The community consultation and key learnings that we are picking up on, and some of these learnings are coming from the social impact assessment, some of it's coming from the social pinpoint data. We're also working quite closely with the historic heritage, the Indigenous cultural heritage, and the group who are running the UNESCO World Heritage listing to make sure that we're adequately capturing those components of the project and reporting on them appropriately. Key issues is a visual impact from private dwellings along the alignment. I think that's obviously the number one and a key feature of a lot of the conversations that we are having and the particular interest of many people. Impacts to the amenity of nearby towns and localities. Another key theme that we're hearing is how does the project sit, how will it sit in the context of features and landscapes that we revere in the community, the impacts to the volcanic cones, the Lerderderg State Forest National Park listing, what's the interactions with Werribee Gorge, Mount Blackwood, will it be visible, how will it be visible from, and what will be the context of the addition of the project and views from Mount Blackwood. Another location that's arising quite sharply is McPherson's Park, and I hope I've got the spelling there correctly. I don't think I have. Another key topic for us is impacts to places and cultural areas of cultural and heritage significance. And there's a couple of layers here. One is the UNESCO World Heritage listing of the gold mining areas toward roughly central to the project around Creswick. Another key component for us is Aboriginal cultural heritage. We need to be really careful on how we consider this and do it in a really appropriate and culturally appropriate way, and we can answer questions on that if it's of a particular interest. European cultural heritage, so what are the locations in the area that have a particular connection to heritage? We know that they're listed through heritage overlays and others. They're in the gold mining areas. They are the historic homesteads and features that are located along the length of the project. We've got the historical mining areas. And another key issue that's rising to the fore consistently is the Kingston Avenue of Honour and features around that township. Just thought we'd spend just a couple of moments on the AOI with the existing conditions and where we're moving forward. So I think for those who've attended the previous webinars, you would have heard about the original area of interest. That was the broad corridor where the project was originally identified to reside within, based on a range of technical considerations and technical studies that had shaped that. We are now down into what's being called the preferred corridor, which is the darker green line that runs roughly central to the AOI. And as we move forward, there will be a preferred route, which within that corridor, which has not yet been defined. That will be the basis of the final landscape and visual amenity assessment that will be taken through as part of the EES. Key components for visual impact assessment is, I think without exception, will be the height, design, location and placement of the transmission towers in the landscape. There are a number of, there are several types and heights being considered. We are, in our conservative approach, basing everything until we get more design detail on an 80 metre high, 500 kV double circuit tower. That forms the basis of a number of things for us. Most importantly is, we call this the theoretical extent of visibility and zones of visual influence. At the moment, because we don't have an alignment, we're looking at an 80 metre high tower. We can come back to this later, would have a vertical field of view of about 5 degrees and would be visually dominant out to about 1 kilometre, where the tower might be visible across the landscape. Our final assessment will, based on an 80 metre high tower, will consider the area surrounding the final alignment to a distance of about 9.2 kilometres. And that will be the full study area for the visual impact assessment. And then we'll break it down into distances in between. So just to explain that a bit further, and what that says is that this distance here relates to a tower in close proximity, the height and scale and the visual prominence. And as we get further away, as we get out this scale, the vertical view angle reduces, the towers become less prominent visually, and their contribution to views and therefore visual impact lessens with distance. And that's how we break this down, and one of the steps for visual impact assessment. Existing conditions within the AOI. So the existing conditions is firstly looking at the features, the land uses, the characteristics, and the way in which the land currently looks visually, topographically, and is used to support and underpin defined landscape character units, which we'll come to at the end. For us, we know that visual impact is very subjective as a topic. So what we try to do with our methodology is put in place a number of assessment components and tasks that are identifiable. We can underpin with data or metrics or features such as the planning scheme that says, this is how we've developed and identified these landscape units that support the visual assessment. Vegetation cover is a key thing. This does a couple of things. It talks about land use, but it also assists to provide some guidance on the ability for landscape to form part of mitigation measures to filter or screen views of towers from sensitive locations. What we know is the light, and I'll sort of highlight these, is the light yellow colours and the lighter green colours are the dry, exotic pastures, cropping areas and native pasture grasses. Exotic tree covers are the area in the more lime green, and we get the native forests in the darker green areas through here, and they're the, like we see in the background, the forested hills around Lerderderg, Wombat State Forest and places like that in the Brisbane Ranges.
Hayden, while we're ticking along there, we've just had one of the participants just said we're just struggling to keep up a little bit. We'll just see if we could just slow it back. I think
sure.
Yeah, if we could just, I'm not sure. I think we're good where we're up to, but yeah, okay. Just trying to take it all in.
I'll just step back a couple, maybe, just to bring it back into context. Hopefully, is area of interest. This was the initial study area that the project started out with. and this black outline formed the basis of the study area for the visual impact assessment of the existing conditions report. As we jumped into the next slide, what I've shown here is in the future, once we get the final alignment, we'll be looking at a distance of 9.2 kilometres from the centre line of the project. And that's based on what we're saying there is at a distance of 9.2 kilometres, an 80-metre high tower would be 0.5 degree in a vertical field of view. So it would be a minuscule element, might be still visible, but its contribution to views and visual impact would be minimal. So within that, we've taken the existing, the AOI, and we're starting to look at key features. The first one is vegetation cover. Now what happens in the landscape? Where are the farming areas? Where are the national parks? Where are the state forests? And where are those uses of significance? Topography we got into is another key feature. Here we've got the flatter landscapes around Melton. Sorry, I'm on the wrong map. We've got the flatter landscapes around Melton. We move into the area around Bacchus Marsh, Darley and Lerderderg State Forest National Park areas. We move out to the central section around Creswick, where we've got the historic gold mining areas, and we start to see the volcanic cones emerge. Then we move out further west as we're moving out towards locations like Mount Ben Major, Mount Beckworth, Mount Bolton, Mount Cole, and those kinds of places. Also linked to topography are major watercourses, of which there are 3 that we've identified that reside in proximity to the project. There's the Werribee River, we've got the Wimmera River roughly central, and Avoca out towards the eastern end. Now, why are they important? Why are they features? They're places where people go to bushwalk, hike, recreate. They're places of amenity that form part of our national parks framework and trails networks. Another key element that we can point to that supports the identification of landscape character and sensitivity is the location and proximity of reserves and bushlands and scenic reserves. We've got the Lerderderg State Park, we've got the Organ Pipes National Park, Werribee Gorge, Lerderderg. As we get further to the west, we've got Creswick, Mount Ben Major, Glen Park, Spring Hill and Creswick. And in amongst these other areas, we've also got a number of scenic reserves. We've got Mount Stiglitz Scenic Reserve, the State Forest of Wombat, Bungle State Forest and Creswick. And then we've just got some key features there of visual features of what makes these places unique. Werribee Gorge, this is looking down towards Darley from the little bridge that runs across the gorge just below the car park. The elevated views from Telford Park and Darley, and then another feature that's emerging through the pinpoint data and social is the Bald Hills 1,000 Steps proposal. And as we get further out, we've got the views to and from locations like Ben Major and Spring Hill and places like that. Land use and townships. This is supported by the planning scheme. Now, this is another element that we rely on to describe land use and sensitivities around that. The light green area that we see through the majority of the region surrounding the project and through the central corridor is within the farming zone. We've got rural conservation zones in this area, so the more mustardy colour out towards those vegetated hills further to the west. We've got green wedge zones around the metropolitan areas closer to Melbourne and Melton and Sydenham. And then we've got the townships that are located along the length of the project. A couple of key features of those, we've got Crowlands and Dean, Amphitheatre, Lexington, Warborough, Creswick, Kingston and Newland towards the eastern areas, western areas. And as we get to the west, we've got the larger places of Sydenham, Caroline Springs and Rockbank. We head out towards Gordon, Bacchus Marsh, Darley, Balan, and as we move through those areas. And apologies if I'm skipping over them. I'm trying to make sure that we get all the content in and leave enough time for questions. Planning overlays. So these sit below the zones, land use zones in the planning scheme. I find these particularly useful at identifying places, landscapes or features of significance. They provide a statement of significance and they also provide for the area and ways in which they should be protected, enhanced, or considered in terms of any development proposal. There's three that I rely on quite heavily, and we've got ESOs, which is the environmental significance overlays. They cover a large portion of the central area and around the areas south of Werribee Gorge and the Werribee Valley. They apply to many areas within the farming zone, and they also include the areas around several of the wind farms, Mirrabul, Yellow Oak South and Vala Wind Farm. Up through the central section here, we've got a number of significant landscape overlays, and a little bit further to the west. These areas specifically identify a number of volcanic cones and landscape features up through this central area. They talk about the prominence of the volcanic cones, how they rise up and how they're interpreted above the plains. They talk about the feature, the form, and how they should be dealt with or responded to in applications. Then we've got features around protecting vegetation. They're called vegetation protection overlays. And they're the darker green areas that we see around sort of the edges of the project and not necessarily central or within the study area. An example of the SLOs are the volcanic cones, and we've got that image over there, and the ESOs is the area around the Parwin Valley. Another key document that we refer to and rely on is the Southwest Landscape Assessment Study. This document was prepared in around 2013. And it does a number of things to identifying key features, locations, and areas to be considered as part of the assessment. We've got landscapes of state significance shown in red, and we've got the area of interest overlay with that at the moment, and we'll talk to those in a bit more detail. Landscapes of regional significance are the areas shown in orange, and we've got more detail on these if we need to. Particular viewing corridors, so locations along roadways that have been identified, and we've got a map showing those, and significant views both regional and state level. Significant landscapes that we've identified, my apologies, let's go back up, is around the eastern section is the Western Volcanic Plains and the Hepburn Gold Mines, roughly central. Lerderderg Gorge and State Park, Werribee Gorge and the Parwin Valley, roughly down here to the south, and the Brisbane Ranges is the red area and Rousey Scarp. Landscapes of regional significance are the islands, uplands around this central region, Mount Buninyong and Mount Warrenheip down here towards the south, and the Bacchus Marsh Agricultural Valley down in this sort of roughly central section. Significant views, there are a couple identified. One is the Berry Deep Lead Gold Mine, and that's also on a significant viewing corridor, which will come up in the next slide. That's in the area or in proximity also to the Heritage Goldfields and close to the area that we understand is being potentially listed as part of the UNESCO World Heritage listing. We've got the Mount Warrenheip and Mount Buninyong. Mount Warrenheip, for those that would have no doubt been up there, is heavily vegetated around some edges. It does allow filtered views, and there's also the fire tower. Mount Buninyong just that little bit further south, and most probably will be outside the viewing corridor and the visual impact assessment. But if we get that way, we'll certainly seek to include views from that location. The third location is Mount Blackwood around Murniong, rises above the plains. The Southwest Landscape Assessment identifies the key views as being away from the project area and towards the forested hills towards the north and east and in that direction. But obviously when we're up there, you know, there's the view towards the west and the south that allows for, you know, quite long and distant views over the landscape and towards the area of the project. So here we'll be turning that around as well to consider those views from Mount Blackwood. Viewing corridors, as I mentioned earlier, I've lifted these out of the document and put them over the AOI. They are these purple sections of roadway. They are locations or roadways that have some connections to the landscape, the history, the area. They line up with significant features or view lines, or they just take in particular locations. in these areas, roughly central, we've got the areas around the goldfields. Moving towards the eastern end, we've got the views out through Coimbatore Road, Swans Road in through the Western Highway, and then down through the Parwin Valley and Brisbane Ranges area further to the south. Off the back of that analysis, we've arrived at 9 what we consider to be reasonably distinct landscape units types with some subcategories. We're certainly open to suggestions on terms of granularity, but where we are at is a key one is townships, and they're those populated centres that are located, or localities along the length of the project and within the study area. Areas in rural residential, they are distinctly different to dwellings in farming land, in that they're in an area that's zoned for the purposes of rural residential living, as opposed to a tendency more towards farming and agriculture. There's 2 landscape unit types in farming. There's the cleared flat farmland, so the area is generally to the east end, roughly central, and as we move out further towards Bulgana, and the hillier farmland, so the landscapes around Murniong and that central section around Creswick. We're putting in landscape unit 3 industrial mining extractives. Now, these respond to the sand mines around Darley and the local extractive industries that we see along the length of the project that don't have a link to or a connection to the historic mining activities. Plantation timbers as distinct to national parks, recognising that although they can and they do appear as natural features, they are areas that are likely to change through harvesting and replanting and renewal of that vegetation and that stock, as well as lakes and waterways, which we discussed earlier, of which there are a number. We've got Miramu, we've got Pikes Reservoir, and those others along the length of the project. National Park State Forests, the volcanic cones in their distinct and striking features, valleys and gorges, such as the Lerderderg Gorge, Werribee Gorge, and the valleys around Parwin Valley. Volcanic cones, that's listed twice, my apologies. And one that we've added as a result of the community consultation and ongoing work is heritage landscapes. We haven't added any definition to these yet, but they recognise the historic heritage in terms of a European context. We're also seeking to recognise the Indigenous or the intangible cultural heritage landscapes and features within those areas. Off the back of that, I've just mapped on this graphic here the locations and features that are of particular interest to us right now. And as I said at the beginning of the session, it's really important to us to have an ongoing and open conversation with local residents to make sure that we are capturing the areas of interest that are held and valued by the communities. And I think, it's an important process to us to make sure that we've got those captured. A couple of key features moving from west to east is we'll talk through potential features to cumulative impacts. We're mindful of the Bulgana Wind Farm, Crowlands and Warborough, and the high voltage transmission line that runs through that section. We're also mindful of the existing wind farms at Lau, Moorabool and Yalloak South, the grid connecting infrastructure and transmission lines associated with those projects. Then stepping out 2 features and areas of interest is the areas and the landscapes around Mount Ben Nevis and Mount Avoca. Mount Bolton and Beckworth, roughly central to the project, slightly to the east. The Southwest Landscape Assessment Studies and the UNESCO landscapes around the central gold mining areas around Creswick. Features at Moorabool Reservoir, the views from Mount Blackwood, my apologies, Pikes Creek, Lerderderg State Park, State Forest, Miramu Reservoir, the townships of Melton, Darley and Kingston and Creswick and others along the length of the project. Next steps, hopefully we're not boring you, we're nearly there I think, is what are we going to continue to do? We're continuing our discussions to consider strategies to include Indigenous cultural heritage, historic heritage and UNESCO heritage areas into the study. We're really mindful of approaching the Indigenous cultural heritage in a way that is sensitive and respectful to those aspects. We don't want to inadvertently record or capture issues of significance and bring them into our report in a way that will be offensive to those features or inadvertently reveal things that shouldn't be done. Continue to identify and evaluate any potential design, siting and alignment options along the project, working in concert with a full suite of technical specialists that will drive that outcome. Assess the landscape and visual effects of the project from those public locations that we've identified and others that will hopefully come forward as part of a transparent process, as well as the private viewpoints and dwellings along the length of the project. I think it's important that the call has been put out for one-on-one sessions already to start engaging in that process, so we understand where you are with proximity to the project and how we might start engaging with you to consider the impacts. And using a range of tools, which I'll come to in a second, including photo montages and other visual techniques that are pretty new to visual impact assessment, and we're hoping to bring to this project to assist with these ongoing conversations. The last and a couple of final steps is the potential for cumulative impacts. So what projects are coming up? What projects exist? What are the similar types of projects that the project might contribute to cumulative visual impacts if it's to be added to this area and views? Excuse me. And then lastly is to explore mitigation measures that might be feasible to be implemented to assist with mitigating the impacts from a visual perspective of the project. The last two slides I promise is a couple of key points around photo montages. One is the technical accuracy of the imagery, and that is that it's the image on the right here is that we know by comparing it to the background that the scale of the features, the bluffs, the valley, the gorges, they're true and correct to the scale of the printed page. That's really useful, and we'll include that imagery in our report. But the most important thing for me in visual impact assessment, I think for the community and those that are affected by the project and decision makers, is perceptual accuracy. And this is the image here on the right. So how do we take the technical imagery and graphics and how do we put it into the scene so that we can understand it, we can interpret it, and we can understand the role and features and the ability for components like height adjustments to reduce the height of infrastructure or moving infrastructure along the line to take it out of a key viewing line or key viewing area from a dwelling, or how can landscape screening assist with screening the visible scale and height of a structure over distance. How do we pull them together? We use a couple of features. I won't bore you with this, but we use a number of overlapped imagery to remove distortion. We use a 60mm lens on a particular camera that's got a whole bunch of techie stuff in it that locates where we are, the viewing direction and the field of view. And we link it back to the parameters of the human vision. As we're compiling it, we have the existing view. And what we do is we build a 3D model of the scene. We register it into the view. We use topography. We use a couple of features. So we know that we've got the vertical height of the image. We've got the horizontal height of the image. Where we've got the benefit of vegetation or silos or others, we'll put some markers in there and we'll use those to locate the virtual and the physical camera together. Then we render the model into the background, and we quite often use a contrasting image like this to make sure that we've got the scale of the technical scale and the information correct. What we tend to find in linear infrastructure like transmission lines, and this is a wind farm, is that as we get to a narrowing or a pointing of the infrastructure, it tapers off and it's less visible than what you would expect it to be. Then we put in some identifying features. So if we've got tower numbers and other things, we'll drop those over the top so we know where we're looking in reference to a compass marker or bearing at the bottom of the image. Then we'll pull the information out and then we're left with a perceptually and technically accurate scene that we know that we can rely on for conversations around views and visual impact. I think that's it for me. I'm happy to open it up for questions to be sent through by Justin.
Yeah, thanks, Hayden. It was very thorough, especially those last few slides. Some great detail. We do have a number of questions that have come through. So what we'll do is we'll roll into those. Some all for Hayden, but there's some that I'll be able to answer too. So Trish sent in a couple. First about the slides, so whether they'll be sent out to us. So Trish, all the slides and the recordings of tonight's and all the webinars will actually be uploaded to the website tomorrow. So you'll be able to get a copy of them, and the presentation will be up there. So feel free to jump onto the website tomorrow and you'll be able to download those. Rolls into another question that I think Shane drew is around the slides being marked confidential. So obviously the reason for that is it's actually just an AusNet template, Shane, and obviously we've shared them this evening, and so they're obviously public now. They'll be made public tomorrow when they go up on the website. So thanks to Trish and Shane for those. Trish did ask another one, Hayden, for you, just around your qualifications and some of your background, if you wanted to share that with the audience.
There are no qualifications for landscape and visual impact assessment. I have been working in this field for about 20 years now, and quite often I've worked on a number of wind farms, a lot of linear infrastructure projects in the area of visual impact assessment.
Okay, tremendous. Thanks, Hayden. And another one from Trish. She got us off to a fly, which is great. So what about what tourists perceive, Hayden? So i.e., visitors to the district. So what about what tourists perceive around the visual amenity aspects?
So they're areas that we're hoping to develop and consider and assess in concert with the social impact assessment and the community stakeholder engagement team. So those two studies for me tend to capture the locations, the areas of interest, the places that people like to go, and they'll be added to features such as those iconic landscapes that we've identified already, and hopefully those will come forward. So we're talking about the scenic drives that are identified in the Southwest Landscape Assessment. We're talking about Werribee Gorge. We're talking about the 1,000 Steps proposal, and those kinds of features. The other is the UNESCO World Heritage listing of the historic gold mining areas. So what we'll be doing is hopefully capturing those locations and those points of interest in proximity to the project. They'll form part of the visual impact assessment, and we'll be interpreting and reporting on how visible the project might be from those locations. What's the impact of visibility? Are there things that we can do about it, or is it something that should be changed or modified to reduce the impact on those features or assets?
Okay, tremendous. Thanks for that, Hayden. Next up, Anne sent through one just mentioning how she believes too many times developers ignore local heritage sites and values, and asked, will AusNet acknowledge those significant sites? And if not, we will be losing, obviously, historical lessons for future generations to come. Yep. I guess in answer to that, Anne, there's obviously a historic heritage study to look at this specifically. So obviously a little bit in consultation with, I guess, what we've done tonight. But I'd say for that one, Anne, the historic heritage study will definitely look at that and take that into consideration.
Just the extension to that one, Justin, if I can, is that we are working closely with the historic heritage assessment to make sure that we've got visibility of those areas of interest for the historic heritage team. We've got an understanding of the heritage significance and the place values. So if we're talking around views to or from those features, if we're talking about a particular place value or other, is that if there is a relevance to views and visual impact, we're trying to capture those and make sure that they form part of the assessment.
Okay, oh, good, thanks for that. So hopefully, Anne, that answers your question there. The next one we had in was from Trish, and Trish has asked if you can just have a quick talk or a bit more expand on the prominence of the volcanic cones. Hayden?
I hope I'm interpreting the question correctly, is that there's a couple of things that stand out for me in a view and visual impact assessment sense, is that they are features that are quite notable as you're driving through the area. They do rise out of, and they're quite striking in their contrast against the plains. They are recognised by significant landscape overlays that identifies them by their footprint, but it also talks about views and locations of significance to those features. My understanding to date and through my site visits is that the majority of them are in private ownership, so there's not views from them, so the interpretive component is views towards them. So what we'd be then doing as part of the assessment is understanding how the project might be visible or interpreted in that context, so views to and from, and trying to understand and map the significance of the location of the view to those features. So is it from scenic corridors? Is it, will it reside in, will it impact, will it alter a view in a particular way from a location or area of interest that's been identified as being significant or other, and capturing those as part of the impact assessment.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Trish. Fantastic question, and yeah, thanks for extending on that, Hayden. It's that's great. So hopefully that answers your question, Trish. The next, well, I know we've got a fair few people that were tuning tonight from down the Derby, Lerdu kind of area, Hayden, and
yes.
So we've probably got a few. I know Shane's just mentioned probably more fun. Me around the slides, is the Pamela Court, Park Court and Augusta Place being, I guess, classed as a significant view?
We haven't done any detailed categorisation of views around that area yet. We're certainly aware of its prominence to Darley being at the northern edge and basically the defining edge of the residential area. We are hoping that we can get conversations and access to some of those properties along there, particularly those that have got concerns, so that we can start understanding the visibility, the views, the viewing angles, so that we can take that back and bring it into the report and report on it correctly. So as I said at the beginning, these open and honest conversations are really important to the process taking place, and important to the process, being assessed in the most appropriate way.
Yeah, and I must admit I've been lucky enough to have visited a couple of homes along there, so I'm sure there's plenty of people that are interested, and that we can encourage people to book a one-on-one session, so we can really answer those questions and understand that a bit better. So that's great. Thank you. We've got another one from Anne, just around the maps, and why do the maps of the corridor vary over each nights of the webinars and the study groups? And I know, Anne, you've mentioned that you find this misleading. The maps and for the study area vary between studies, so because they're actually looking at different aspects. So not all maps can be the same to show the same aspects of different topics. So especially on a scale over a long, I guess, stretch of close to 190 kilometres. So inevitably the maps will change a little with each subject matter we address. So that's pretty much why. Obviously, Hayden's map there probably varies a little bit, not greatly, but to some of the others. But it's just related to the subject matter that we're covering on the evening. Yeah,
I think an important point there is that I think the starting point for each study is the AOI. And as Justin points out, that we're all looking at different things. So the technical specialist and the ecologist will be looking at the location under the alignment. That's their topical area of interest. For me, we recognise that the project will be visible for many kilometres beyond the project, and that's outlined in this map, this diagram through here. We know that visibility is over distance. This is a landscape scale. It's not a corridor scale. So our future maps will take in an area that's much larger than the AOI and probably much larger than many of the other assessments.
Okay, thanks for that. What else have we got? Tricia sent in another question, and what is the extent on a map of the UNESCO bid? So my understanding, for that one, Trish, is that's still being determined by the team leading the bid, and we're consulting with them, so we can hopefully get as much information about that at the time. But at the moment, it's still being determined, so don't have a great deal of information at hand apart from that. So sorry about that one, Trish. But it rolls in, I guess, to your next question for you, Hayden, is if you can remind Trish what is SLO and SWLAS?
Sure. Sorry, there was a few acronyms there. So SLO is a significant landscape overlay, and that can be found in the planning scheme. And if you go into, you can even find it online. There's a Vic portal, Vic government portal called MapShare, and you can drill into the various layers of the planning scheme by toggling on and off land use zones and down into the overlays, and that will click into those features and bring up those statements of significance. The other one I used was ESO, which is an environmental significance overlay. Another one was VPO, which is vegetation protection overlay. And the final one was SWLAS, which is Southwest Landscape Assessment Study. Bit of a mouthful. It's also described in some forums, the same document, same study as Southwest Victorian Landscape Assessment, or SWVLAS. And that can be found in various parts. It's a bit of a difficult document to navigate. That's on the planning portal website under documents.
Okay, so on the planning portal and on MapShare, you said probably the best place to access those.
That's right. So the Victorian government mapping and planning databases.
Okay, and not sure if you'd need GIS kind of software on your computer.
No, they're open source. Just open them up through your browser and start clicking away.
Beautiful. The next one, Hayden, you did mention the area north of Darley, south of the Lerderderg, having significant views. Why not? As these views are a narrow corridor and extremely significant as they overlook state significant landscape of the Lerderderg. That's from Darren. So I can break that down a bit.
Was that a question or a statement?
Well, I guess he did mention. I think we've probably covered a bit when we spoke about Pamela Court, and that's kind of the area of Darley in between. So I guess we are looking at that. So why haven't these views been, I guess, mentioned in that fact when it is such a narrow corridor there?
To that end, I can't answer that one. So it hasn't featured in any of the government mapping and the strategic documents that we've looked at. And I'm unclear as to why it hasn't been included in those documents. They're not things that I've authored. So they are strategic landscape assessments that were prepared by the Victorian government in about 2013. So, light years ahead of this project. And the overlays and the planning zones and those features are also artefact of strategic and policy work that sits well outside the remit of this study.
Okay, and but that said, you did have it on your map. I think a couple of slides further down, didn't you? It's a significant piece. I think a drop pin.
Oh yes, sorry. As an area that we certainly want to pay a lot of attention to, for sure.
Yeah.
So for us, even though it doesn't reside in any of those strategic documents or policies, we know that it's an area of particular interest for the local community. It is in proximity to the Lerderderg State Park National Forest. It is in proximity to the entrance to Werribee Gorge. It is in proximity to those residences on the north-facing slope of Darley. It is visible from Telford Park, and we know it's also potentially visible from the 1,000 Steps proposal at the top of the hill there. So although it doesn't have that statutory support and weight, it's certainly an area that we are keen to understand and pay due regard to.
Tremendous. And in saying that too, that's why we do encourage residents, whether they're there within the area, to book ones that you can book online to be able to have those conversations, which would be great. We've got a question. Lloyd sent in a question. Will lines straddle Dalesford to Bland Road, a major tourist drive in the Dalesford from Melbourne?
Ask that question again.
So will the line straddle Dalesford to the Land Road, a major tourist drive into Dalesford from Melbourne?
If that's the way the alignment is taking it, possibly. And I guess they'll be looking at the minimising the impacts through that location as far as practical through design and other features. And there's a number of ways that I think that they can do that by locating towers back from the road edge, locating in areas where there's vegetation along roadsides so that you pass under it and you realise it when you're moving under it and then keep going. But obviously those things that will be driven largely by technical outcomes, and we'll be reporting and assessing on those as they are.
And it probably leads us in, I guess, just for the audience's, I guess, understanding, we're actually getting a lot of people are sending in questions relating to impacts. And unfortunately, because the impacts have not yet been determined or assessed, the mitigation is yet to be identified for that. So we are getting lots of questions about impacts and mitigation. Because that work is still being undertaken, we just don't have those answers at the moment.
We can't do the impact assessment until we have the alignment. So, until we know where the project theoretically might land in space, we can't understand, I guess those more nuanced questions around, will it or won't it be visible? Can landscape screening be effective for my property based on distance and height of trees and setbacks and those kinds of things? How does it sit in terms of topography and landform and features? Until we get that alignment that's supported by the technical data that makes it stand up, we can't do and respond to those questions, unfortunately.
Thanks. And Frank sent a question in. Will it be possible for investigations to include visits to relevant people in impact-prone areas? I'm happy for people to come to my place at Pamela Court, Frank says.
Sure.
Yep.
Put your name down, make yourself known to the project, and more than happy to come and have conversations.
And for, I guess, some feedback to Frank, I know, like I said, personally been to a couple of houses in the area, definitely had someone resident there send and share some videos that he flicked through, which was great for to have a good understanding. So, Frank, we do encourage yourself and anyone else that does want to occur, by all means, reach out and we can.
What we're hoping to develop is a suite of tools as well. One is, I should have mentioned this earlier, is virtual reality imagery. And I don't know if anyone has seen this technology before, probably have through games and things like that, gaming engines, but select key locations along the alignment that are familiar to people where we can insert the project into that view or that scene so that you can either go and stand in that location and take in the ambience of the view and understand the scale and visibility and depth of perception, either in your own living room or out on site, and hopefully some other tools that we can share with you soon around the ability to understand and interpret the project and its role in your views.
And so, Hayden, we've got the ability to bring those tools into people's lounge rooms. Is that what you're saying?
We're looking at ways to make that happen. So at the moment, we are pretty confident that we can do that from static locations, so fixed locations along the alignment.
Yep.
We would ideally love the ability to bring that technology into people's living rooms or their back decks or their patios or other locations to understand those features. But again, it's pretty groundbreaking stuff for visual impact assessment, let alone the project. So watch this space.
Oh, beautiful. No, that's great. Thank you. Another one Frank has flicked through is what considerations do you give to LGA planning schedules? So Moorabool, for example, have a policy that serves to protect the Lurdu and surrounding landscape from development impact.
Yep.
So I'll go back to the first bit of it. So what consideration do you give to LGA planning schedules?
So as we step through there, there's a couple of ways that they feature. One is the land use zones, and this was this high level map. So what do the planning zones allow for, permit, what do they protect along the length of the project? And then the other is, and I think this is what Frank was referring to, is the significant landscape overlays. So what do they do? What do they seek to protect? How are they written? And what are the values and the features? And how are we interacting with those? there might be instances where, the impact is high and it's not avoidable for a range of reasons. We report it that way. We don't downplay it. Or, these are the features and this is how it will interact with it, resides within those views, or not be visible at all.
Okay, great. Thank you. So hopefully, Frank, that's answered your question. John sent in one in relation to adding if we could add a list of acronyms in the published document that we're going to add. So, John, what we can do, we can actually add that to the frequently asked questions. So in relation to the acronyms used tonight, so people can look up some of that mapping if they need it, that Hayden mentioned earlier. Yeah. So we can definitely do that for people. And just going through, just making sure, I think Anne might have sent another question through. We've spoken about the prominence and Pam. No, I think we've got. Everything. We've got most of the questions that people have put forward. We do have. Luna sent one through. What people see is very objective. So, how can this be determined by science? Hayden?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. One is, absolutely, visual impact assessment is subjective. And as I said at the beginning, there are things that we try and do and measure and map that breaks down that subjectivity. We call those the quantitative impact assessment components. So one was scale over distance. We know that as the project gets further away, it reduces in visual prominence. It also resides in the background of the views. So we can measure that over distance in terms of prominence and visual scale. We've also got other tools that we use called scene area analysis mapping, and that's a geographical information system. What it does is that we build a model in the landscape and we ask that model to map those areas that can see project infrastructure and the numbers of project infrastructure and those kinds of things. So firstly, we work out where, how tall, how far away the project might be visible from and how visually prominent it might be. Then with the overlay of scene area analysis mapping, where are the locations that the project might be visible from and what's the significance of those locations? And that comes back to that pinpoint map we had earlier around locations that we're targeting at the moment. And then reporting on the prominence of those views. So as we get there, how visible is it? Is it prominent? Can it be screened? Is it screened? What are people doing when they see it? Are they looking north over a reservoir and is it running behind them? Or is it right across the front of the view towards prominent vegetated hills and other features that are protected? So we map those things, we measure them, we do what we can with those, and then we bring it into the qualitative assessment of the views. So what is it? Why is it? Why is it there? How are we looking at it? And what are we doing when we're there? And what's the significance?
Okay. Great, thank you. We've had a couple more roll in. We've only got a few more minutes, but we've got one here from Darren. Do you take into consideration the duration of views and the number of observers?
Yeah, we do. So that's a great question. So there's 4 or 5 key components. Is it visible from where you are or isn't it? How far away are you? So distance, visual prominence. How many people are likely to see it? And then the duration. So is it a fleeting view, on a trail or a roadside, or is it a location where you're likely to stop and be fixed for a period of time? And then what's the significance of the location? What are you actually doing when you're at that location? So there's sort of 4 to 5 key pillars that roll up into the overall visual impact assessment.
Okay. That's fantastic. Thank you for that. I guess that brings us to the end of our presentation. We did have a few questions coming late that we'll have a look at and try and answer those and get them into our asked questions. So thanks very much for that, Hayden. Very thorough, some good questions there. And I think highlights definitely some of the need for, especially, we had a lot coming from obviously around the Darley Lutterberg area of those people want that more information that to book their one-on-ones. They are filling up fast, and I'm sure once the presentations go live tomorrow, there'll be a lot more interest. So after tonight, everyone, I guess, first of all, on behalf of the project team, I'd like to thank you all for your attendance this evening. We'll be sending out the link to the online survey shortly, so we really do request that you take it. It's just a couple of minutes to fill that in and give us some feedback along the way. Please go to our website, like I mentioned, have a look to book your one-on-one session. So whether it's for this topic, whether it's around agriculture, bushfire, as I said, as they go live tomorrow, there'll be a lot more people logging on, and they are filling up rather quickly. So we ask people to get in and book your specialist time one-on-one. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to email us at info@westvictnp.com.au, and one of the stakeholder team will get back to you with any questions or queries you might have. Lastly, I guess the project, AusNet Services, we do acknowledge the uncertainty that this project causes and the concern it may have caused for many members of the community. And we encourage you, if you are, to reach out to any of the support services listed below. They're entirely confidential and free to access. So if yourself or a loved one or someone you know, a community member you believe needs some support, please feel free to reach out to some of those services. As I said, strictly confidential and entirely free of charge. So again, thank you everyone for your attendance this evening. Thank you, Hayden, for the in-depth presentation. It's greatly appreciated you give your time. And just a big thanks to the team behind the scenes that have helped make all these webinars possible over the last couple of weeks. So again, thanks everyone and have a good evening.